Hello and welcome to How to Write a Book in 40 Hours. I am your host, Gertrude Mache, hailing you from Sydney, Australia today to run this How to Write a Book in 40-Hour workshop. I really want to thank you all for tuning in to come and listen to this interesting workshop that will help you take your book from A to Z in a quick, easy, and effortless way. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I am originally from Zimbabwe, and I've been living in Wellington, New Zealand for the last 14 years. My journey as an author has been very, very interesting. My very first book took me 14 years to write. It was really a journal, a mixture of poetry, some memoirs, short stories as I traveled around the world, having lived in London, Norway, traveling all over Europe to Denmark, Sweden, and Switzerland, and then moving to live in South Africa, and now finally New Zealand. And along my journey, I got to meet some really interesting people. I got to experience the kind of thing you don't really experience in one lifetime. And I wrote about it and decided to publish that book 14 years later. But it was a very slow and painful process. My second book took me exactly 40 hours to produce. And I'm going to share a little bit about that story as I go through today's workshop. At any point, if you have any questions you want to ask, please feel free to type into the chat window and I will answer those questions. And throughout this workshop, I will be sharing questions that have already been asked by some of you who emailed through your questions. The rerun of today's workshop will be available to everybody who registered, so you can get to watch this again. If you hadn't sent me your questions, or if more questions popped up for you while I'm running the workshop, please feel free to send me an email. My email address is gertrudemache@gmail.com, and I will share all of my contact details at the end of this workshop. Fire those questions at me so that I can create another video very similar to this that can help take you to the next level. So I'm going to share my screen, and if you have registered, you will have received my ebook that will take you from A to Z and show you how to self-publish your book in 40 hours. The How to Write a Book in 40-Hour process is fun, it's interesting, and very, very simple. And what I really would like is for all of you to take something away from this process and make it your own. Do remember as I go through the workshop that it's just a process that you can use to produce your book in a really quick and fast way. So let me tell you more about how to write a book in 40 hours. This is a process that doesn't require you to do any writing, and it doesn't require you to do any typing if you don't want to. I personally find that I speak really fast, and when I have organized my thoughts and I'm working on a book, I can produce content faster speaking the book into life as opposed to sitting down and thinking and typing. Whenever I try and type or write down my words, I find that I'm not fast enough to catch the magical thoughts that are coming into my mind. And it's a very unconventional way of producing content. But what I found is that if I sat down and tried to think some of the words I've written so far, I could not string those words together or as easily and as beautifully as I do when I'm speaking. So this is just a process. It may or may not work for you, but try it out. I've coached over 67 authors who've published their books. I still have another 34 who are going at the moment after I raised the first challenge in June last year. And what I found was that for people who aren't used to hearing themselves speaking, it can be very challenging to hear the sound of your own voice. So if you feel that it's icky and it doesn't feel right, I do suggest that you give it a chance. Try it 3, 4, 5 hours, and you'll find that the more you get used to your voice, the easier it gets for you to use this process to produce your book. However, if you find that it is easier for you to type, by all means, if you're tactile, go ahead and do it. I think I'm a very auditory person in the way that I deliver information and take in information. I actually don't read books, but I listen to audiobooks. So you do whatever is going to work for you. So I've already told you that I live in Wellington, New Zealand. And at the end of today's presentation, I would like you to email me and schedule a 30-minute free consultation where we can talk through the content that you've listened to today, and you can tell me what has come up for you. So we're going to start off with thinking about designing your book cover first. Now you may be asking yourself, why would I design a book cover for a book that I haven't written? Having a book cover designed gives you a visual image of what you're working towards. I read a book once by Deepak Chopra that talks about living backwards in time. It's called The Way of the Wizard Merlin. It totally changed my life when I realized that if I'm working on a project and I produce a visual image of what the end product will look like, I do produce whatever it is I'm trying to produce really fast. So we will produce the cover of your book first for 2 reasons. Number 1 is for you to have a visual of what your book is going to look like as you go through the writing process. It's really important for you to get that visual image so that you know what you're working towards. The other reason why I produce the book cover first is because you can actually start marketing and promoting your book prior to your finishing writing. Now, why would you want to do that, you might ask yourself. Anybody can write a book. The challenge will always come in how to sell the book when you're finished. And part of this program involves my teaching you how you can pre-sell your book and generate an interest in the book while you're writing it, so that by the time you finish writing, you already have people who have pre-ordered the book. It not only puts you under pressure, but it holds you accountable to people's money and is an extremely motivating thing to do for you to produce your book really fast. So before we start thinking of the cover, I really want you to take a step back and think of what your branding strategy is going to be. How do you want to brand yourself as an author in the marketplace? I personally decided that because I'm from Zimbabwe in Southern Africa, I want people to know that I am from the African continent. So part of my branding strategy is that for every single book that I have produced, I am on the front cover of every single book. I'm wearing traditional African clothes because I don't want to be mistaken to be an African from Jamaica or the United States or the United Kingdom. I want people to know that I am definitely out of Africa. So my traditional African clothes have become part of my branding. For you, it could be a color scheme, it could be a logo, it could be anything that makes your books jump out at people, especially jumping out of a bookshelf. You really want to be different. So hold on to that as one of the things that you will do to produce your book from beginning to end. The next thing that I'm going to share with you is all about thinking very carefully and very clearly about what you're going to do by starting with the end in mind. When you start with the end in mind, like I said, it is an amazing motivator. Keep the cover of your book wrapped around an old book. Keep it at your computer, carry it in your handbag, Talk about it to people, look at it every day so that it keeps you motivated and energized to reach the vision of completing your book. Things to remember when you start speaking your book into life are the following. Everybody has a story or a message to share. So the best books that I've ever written are books with short stories in them that illustrate what the author is trying to teach. People remember stories. And somebody out there in the world is just waiting to read your book. You have to believe that. They say that the richest places in the world are graveyards because they're full of people who had brilliant ideas and they didn't have the courage to write it down on a piece of paper. So if you can trust yourself and hold on to the fact that whatever message is in your heart, whatever words are in your head, whatever knowledge you've accumulated up to this point in your life is worth something that can be wrapped up into the content of a book, do it. Do not hesitate. While you're writing your book, remember not to preach. I tell people, don't preach, show, don't tell. Show people by example what you have done in your life. Show people by example what they can do in their lives as they create the contents of whatever they're going to do going forward. So, you will learn how to speak your book into life by talking about its contents and getting someone else to type it up. If you can speak, you can write a book in 40 hours, and I'm about to show you how. Let's look at book titles and the things that you need to do to generate a good book title for your book. Go online and do a survey. Think up a book title, do a survey and ask your family, your friends, people that you know, which of the titles you've chosen sounds good, makes sense in terms of the content of your book. Go onto Google and type in the title and see how many other people have already written books with the same book title. See how many people are searching for the search words that you have put in the title of your book. Go onto Amazon and search for the book title. It's always good to see what else is out there. Check out your competition. If the book title is gone, do not be discouraged. There are thousands of books with exactly the same title online, and it doesn't matter. The thing that will differentiate your book from somebody else's book with the same title is the subtitle. So if you really like the title, hold on to it. If it's a famous person who's written a book with a similar title that you've chosen, it might actually work in your favor because somebody else might type in the title into Google and pick up your book instead of the famous person's book. Once you've decided on the title, I do recommend that you go onto GoDaddy or you go onto any website that allows you to register the domain name. Why would you do this? One of the things I've learned in this business is that ideas are very, very common. In fact, they are more common than they are uncommon. So there will definitely be someone else out there who has seen or thought of your subject matter, who might decide to write a book, and they would probably go online and register the URL to protect it. So once you've decided on your book title, register the URL and make sure that you get it. I also suggest that you register a URL in your own personal name. Why would you do this? It's because if your book becomes popular or famous, you would be surprised that someone might be watching you online and seeing how amazing your work is, and they will go online and register your own name. And you will have to buy that URL back from those people at exorbitant prices. I'm telling you this because it happened to me. I had to wait 10 years to be able to get the URL with my name back. And I have a very unusually spelled name. But someone out there in the world thought that maybe someday I would be famous and they registered the URL of my name. I struggled to get it back. I wasn't prepared to pay $10,000 to get it. So I waited. I waited 10 years, and then I managed to register it in my own name. So just have that in the back of your mind and go ahead. It's not expensive. On most websites, you can register a URL from $9.99 a year. So go ahead and do that. The title of your book and the subtitle are really important. The title of your book can be anything you want. However, the subtitle is rarely used to describe what your book is all about. So, if you were to write a book called Never Give Up or Live Hard, Never Give Up would be the subtitle, and you need Never Give Up would be the title, and you need a subtitle that describes what your book is all about. So, the subtitle can help you narrow down your target market and explain your message in the book. A very simple example is Never Give Up as a title and a practical guide to overcoming depression. So what are the key words in the subtitle that will make someone find this book? Number one, it's a practical guide. People love books that guide them. And number two is the word depression and overcoming depression. So if somebody was looking for content on overcoming depression, they would definitely find your book through the search engines. Another example is Live Hard as a title. Subtitle, How to Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. Again, what are the key words? Fear. A lot of people are fearful of change. They're fearful of changing their life circumstances. Fear is something that obsesses all of us in all walks of life. So if somebody was to go online and look for content or a book talking about fear, they would definitely find your book because it is in the subtitle. It's very important to decide right now who you are writing for. Who is your target market? The reason why I say this is because your target market are those people who are interested in your content. If I was to write a book for teenagers, I would have to write at a teenager reading level. I would have to make my lessons and my stories as interesting, as engaging, so I keep those teenagers interested in my content. If I was writing for a demographic of people over the age of 50, it would definitely be a more serious book. So it wouldn't sound anything like what I would write for a teenager. So have that in the back of your minds too. And what I found is that the more narrow your target market, the more effective you are going to be in producing content that is relevant to that target market. I'll say it again. The more you narrow down your target market, the more effective you are going to be as an information service person or as somebody who sells information to people. You can't sell to everyone. You have to make sure that you have it very clear. Who am I writing for? Is it men? Is it women? What is the age group? Are they aged from 30 to 65? Or are they aged from 15 to 19? Make a clear decision, have a cutoff point, and go ahead and produce your book. So, here is a few examples on how you can decide on your target market. You could write about anyone who is sick, so people who are ill could be able to find your book. You could write about being tired of giving up. A lot of people are in dead-end careers and they have tried this and tried that and they're about to give up on their dreams. Not giving up is something that you can write about. Not finishing what they start due to fear. I talked about fear before. Living with fear, depression, sadness, emotional stability, writing for women, writing for men, writing for children, writing for entrepreneurs, writing for senior citizens. you can make a very clear decision who you are writing for. It is absolutely imperative. I talked about how to write a book and how sharing personal stories really helps you explain your lessons. Wrap the lesson around a story and people will remember the story and they will get the lesson. Illustrate the process step by step. People like to be given a how-to guide to do things. Use pictures and diagrams where possible in the book. Right now, visuals are very, very important because you want to make sure that you are reaching people at all levels, and the book is not just full of content. Having those visual images and pictures will really help people who are visual. Perhaps you could summarize a whole chapter on one page with a diagram that takes a person from point A to point Z. Lastly, make the solution easy, achievable, and practical. Keep it simple if you're trying to show people how to do something through the content of your book. Now, I'm going to just go back a second and explain to you how the How to Write a Book in 40-Hour process came about. I, as I said earlier, had been living overseas and I was writing a journal. My second book was written in 40 hours because I work as a change agent in organizations. I'm hired to go into the corporate world and I help with shifting staff morale. So part of my background is that I have a human resources degree. I made it in industrial. Workplace behavior is something that I specialized in, and I am called into the corporate world to help shift people's behavior patterns and morale issues. There are two major banks in New Zealand that had merged that year. This is in 2007. And I had met one of the bank managers at a local government conference. And he called me and said, Gertrude, I need you to come in and motivate my staff. I have people who are just not getting on. They have their jobs. They just have to get used to working together and implementing the changes that the bank has imposed on them. Please come in, he said. Just come and share your story. And because I have a rags to riches story, I've had a lot of challenges that have happened in my life, to the point where I've learned from every single thing that has ever gone wrong, and I now teach through my mistakes, because there is always a lesson to be learned in the things that we consider to be the worst things that have happened to us. So I went into this bank not quite sure how to position my presentation. I knew I wanted to share some of my major life challenges and share the lessons that I learned from all of them. So I came up with a title called, It's Not About What Happens That Matters. I had gone for a photo shoot wearing my traditional African clothes, and I found a really nice photograph that I liked, and I literally slapped this title onto a photograph, and that was the first image for a 10-slide PowerPoint presentation. The 10 slides that I had in this presentation were just pictures that reminded me of 10 stories of my major life challenges. It was a big organization. They had 650 people who would be brought in groups of 100, 120 into the boardroom every hour. I did the same presentation 6 times that day. But what I did is, before people sat down, I gave them a feedback form. And I asked them to write down any questions that came up as I was speaking, or to write down any points that really resonated with them, that really hit home. I also put on this feedback form a little tick box that said, today's presentation is based on a book that I'm writing. Would you like to order a copy? Tick here. I gave my presentation, and at the end of that day, I collected all of those feedback forms and realized that I had pre-sold 350 copies of a book that did not exist. I had hit on a brilliant idea. People did want to capture what I had presented, and I had to write the book really fast. And I'm telling you this because a lot of you will get speaking opportunities. You will get opportunities to go out there and produce content on the fly. And you want to make sure that if you are a speaker and you've written a brilliant speech that could be backed up by a book, you produce the book, or at least produce the cover of the book, and pre-sell that book at that conference to all of the people who've attended the conference. So this is what I did. I got home and I got my personal assistant to type up all of the common thread of questions that were asked. She put all of this in an Excel spreadsheet and typed it up. We collated the common thread of questions so that I could see where the commonality in the questions lie. We found that each of those common threads could become the title or the chapter of a book. And I pulled out my dictaphone and I recorded myself answering the questions. So we captured the audio files of my answers to their questions. We got in an audio typist who typed up all of the content, and literally within 15 hours, I had produced the first draft of my book called How to Write a Book in 40, of my book, just to prove the How to Write a Book in 40-Hour process. It was pretty fascinating because that first draft was then edited by myself. I took out all of the questions and I started working on this new book. By another 5 to 6 hours, I had finished, and then I handed over that manuscript to my editors, who went through a 3-step process of editing the book. The first time they read it through, they gave me back a lot of questions. They told me the things that didn't make sense, and they wanted me to clarify certain points. I then went back to that manuscript and added all of the questions that they asked and made the book flow even better, and I sent it back to them. They then read through the book, this time like a real book, and they tried to find a common thread that could pull the reader from beginning to end in terms of the content that I had produced. Once this was done, I revised the manuscript again, sent it back to the editors, and they did a final edit and proofread, and we literally got that book on Amazon and on Kindle within 40 hours. It was a fascinating process. I proved personally that it could be done, and you have got to believe that you can do this too. Now let me share with you a few of the insights that I learned as I was going through this process. Consistency is one of the main reasons why people don't write and finish producing their books. You have to be consistent about when you are going to sit down and think and type. Why do you have to be consistent? You need to carve out a time in the day where you have no disturbances and no distractions. I ended up finding that 2 o'clock in the morning was my best writing hour. I'm a married woman. I have 3 children. I would prepare supper for my family, wash the dishes, go to sleep early at between 8:30 and 9 in the evening, and I would sleep for 4 hours and then wake up, and at 2 a.m. I could produce 2 to 3 hours worth of work and then go back to sleep, wake up at 7:30 and take my kids to school. So carve out a time in the day that you know you will not be disturbed. When you know that you time strictly to the writing of your book. Once you have managed to do that, it will make your life so easy. So be consistent about your writing hour. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about how to write fiction. Or rather, fiction is very easy to produce for a number of reasons. It's easy to produce because you are really relying on yourself to come up with information that doesn't exist. And I have found it absolutely fascinating that most people find it difficult to write fiction. When you write fiction, you have to decide on a number of things. You can decide, for example, on an idea. It could be a dream. It could be something that inspires you or that spurs you to find a beginning point in the production of that book. The other thing that you could do is feed your idea. And by feeding your idea, I mean do some research. Go onto the internet. I mean, we live in an information age where you can find anything, any information. You can go to the library and get some books and read up on interesting topics. Go outside and take a walk in nature so that you can get the inspiration to get those creative juices to flow. Once you've got the basic plot and you start setting and figuring out, when does the story actually begin? Is it in the present? Is it in the future? Or is it in the past? Or it could be in all three paradigms. That's the beautiful thing about fiction. You have poetic license to make the book anything you want. Once you've got that basic plot, think of the preceding incident that has made the story possible. What happened in the very first frame, in the very first instance? Is it something that happened in the past that could affect what's happening in the future? It's up to you. Do an outline of your story. Write a few sentences of paragraphs on what's going to happen in that chapter, and then just start writing. Writing fiction is easy. You can change anything at any point, at any time that isn't working. I've had people who struggle because they write a character who literally takes over the story, and then they have no control over what's coming. I'm going to stop here, and this will be the beginning of part 1 of How to Write a Book in 40 Hours. I've outlined very clearly where you begin and where you end. And now I'm going to take a small commercial break, and I'll be back with you with part 2, where I talk about how to write a non-fiction book. So take a break, go and get yourself a glass of water, stretch, and come back in the next 10 minutes, and we will continue with part 2.